The ice storm hit Riverside County, California on a Tuesday afternoon in February, and by the time the power went out at 6 p.m., I had already fired up my Honda generator and settled into my warm living room with a sense of satisfaction that only comes from being properly prepared. My name is Nathan Russo, and I had spent the last 3 years living in the Meadowbrook Heights community, a planned housing development about 40 miles east of Los Angeles where every mailbox looked identical, and the HOA president, Patricia Hensley, treated the neighborhood covenants like they were the 10 Commandments carved in stone. She was the kind of woman who measured the height of your grass with an actual ruler and sent violation notices if your holiday decorations stayed up past the designated removal date. Her blonde hair was always styled in that specific soccer mom cut that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager," and her voice had a perpetual edge of condescension that made every interaction feel like a personal attack. I watched through my front window as the streetlights flickered and died, plunging the entire neighborhood into darkness except for my house, which glowed warmly from every window. The generator hummed steadily in my backyard, exactly where I had installed it last summer, despite Patricia's objections that it was an eyesore. I had gotten the proper permits, followed every building code, and even planted shrubs around it to minimize the visual impact, but she had still sent me 3 letters about it. The temperature outside was dropping fast. The weather reports had predicted this storm for days, warning that an unusual weather pattern was bringing freezing rain and ice to Southern California, a phenomenon rare enough that most people had not taken it seriously. I had taken it very seriously. My generator was connected to my home's electrical panel through a transfer switch, professionally installed and capable of running my furnace, refrigerator, and most of my lights for days as long as I kept it fueled. I had 60 gallons of stabilized gasoline stored in approved containers in my detached garage, along with enough food and water to last 2 weeks. I made myself a cup of hot cocoa, the real kind made with milk and actual cocoa powder, not the instant stuff, and added a splash of vanilla extract the way my grandmother had taught me. The furnace kicked on right on schedule, and I could hear it pushing warm air through the vents. Outside, my neighbors were starting to realize the power was not coming back on any time soon. The first knock on my door came at 7:15. I was not surprised to see Patricia standing there, wearing a designer winter coat that probably cost more than my generator. Her husband, Mark, stood behind her, looking uncomfortable as usual. Mark was a decent guy who worked in finance and seemed to spend most of his energy trying to mitigate his wife's behavior. "Nathan," Patricia said, her tone making my name sound like an accusation, "I see you have power." "I do," I said, not opening the door any wider than necessary. The cold air was already creeping in. "The entire neighborhood is without electricity. This is a community emergency situation." "It is definitely an emergency," I agreed. "Good thing I prepared for it." Her eyes narrowed. "The HOA bylaws clearly state that in times of community emergency, all resources must be shared equally among residents." I had to give her credit for creativity. "That is interesting. Which section is that?" "Section 12, subsection 4. "Section 12 is about pool maintenance," I said. "I read the bylaws pretty thoroughly when I bought the house. There is no provision requiring residents to share personal property during emergencies." "That is not the point," she said, her voice rising slightly. "We are a community. You have an obligation to help your neighbors." "I am happy to help my neighbors," I said. "Mrs. Chen next door is welcome to come charge her phone anytime. The Robertsons across the street can use my generator if they need to run medical equipment." but I am not obligated to surrender my personal property because you did not prepare for a predictable weather event." Patricia's face was turning red despite the cold. "I am the HOA president, and I am formally requesting that you move your generator to the community center so it can be used to heat the common area where everyone can benefit." "No." The simplicity of my answer seemed to stun her for a moment. She was not used to people saying no to her. "This is unacceptable," she said. "I will be calling an emergency HOA board meeting about this." "You do that," I said. "In the meantime, I am going to close my door before all my heat escapes. Stay warm, Patricia." I closed the door before she could respond. Through the window, I watched her stomp back toward her house, which was already dark and getting colder. Mark followed her, his shoulders hunched against the wind. I returned to my couch, where my hot cocoa was still steaming. The weather report on my battery-powered radio said the ice storm was intensifying, and power might be out for several days. The temperature was supposed to drop below freezing tonight, which was dangerous for houses with no heat and potentially frozen pipes. 20 minutes later, there was another knock. This time it was Mark alone. "Hey, Nathan," he said, looking embarrassed. "Look, I am sorry about Patricia. She gets worked up." "I know," I said. "What can I do for you, Mark?" She sent me back to negotiate. "She wants to know if you will rent the generator to the HOA for the duration of the emergency." "It is not for rent," I said. "It is installed permanently in my backyard and connected to my electrical panel. I cannot just move it to the community center." "Could you run extension cords or something? The community center is 300 yards away." "I would need commercial-grade cable, proper connectors, and even then it would be a fire hazard and probably violate electrical codes. Plus, my generator is only big enough to power one house. If I try to run it to multiple locations, it will overload and shut down, and then nobody has power." Mark nodded slowly. "That makes sense. I tried to tell Patricia that, but she is convinced you are being selfish." "I prepared for this," I said. "I spent money and time making sure my house would be functional during an emergency. That was my choice. Other people made different choices. Patricia thinks the HOA can impose an emergency assessment to purchase generators for all the homes." I laughed. "Good luck with that. That would require a vote, and I guarantee the homeowners would not approve a special assessment to buy everyone a $5,000 generator plus installation costs." "I know," Mark said. He looked tired. "She is already planning to fine you. For what? She will think of something." "She always does." He was right about that. Patricia's favorite hobby was finding violations in the HOA covenants and issuing fines. She had once fined a family because their children's chalk drawings on the sidewalk counted as unauthorized decoration. The fine had been overturned when they threatened legal action, but it had taken months of stress and arguing. "Let her try," I said. "I have not violated anything. My generator is legal, permitted, and installed according to code. I am not required to share my personal property, and there is no HOA bylaw that says otherwise." Mark sighed. "I will tell her. Stay warm, Nathan. You too, Mark. Seriously, if you guys need to charge phones or anything, come over. I am not trying to be a jerk. I just am not giving up my generator." He nodded and walked back into the darkness. I felt a little bad for him. Being married to Patricia must have been exhausting. I checked my fuel level. The generator was sipping gas efficiently since it was only running my essential systems. I had set my thermostat to 68 degrees, warm enough to be comfortable but not wasteful. At this rate, I could run for days without refueling. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my neighbor Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who lived in the house to my left. "Nathan, my house is very cold. Can I come over?" I texted back immediately. "Of course. Door is unlocked. Come now." Mrs. Chen appeared a few minutes later, bundled in multiple sweaters and carrying her small dog, a Pomeranian named Machai. She was 82 years old and lived alone after her husband passed away 3 years ago. "Thank you so much," she said, her teeth chattering. "I did not realize how cold it would get so quickly." "You can stay as long as you need," I said. "Do you want some hot cocoa?" Her face lit up. "That would be wonderful." I made her a cup while she settled on the couch with Machai. The little dog was shivering despite his fur. "How are the others doing?" I asked, handing her the cocoa. "The Robertsons went to stay with their daughter in Pomona. The Mitchells have a fireplace, so they are burning wood. Everyone else is just bundling up and waiting." "What about Patricia?" Mrs. Chen gave me a knowing look. "She is very angry with you." I gathered that. "She came to my house and told me I should not accept help from you because you were violating community values." I set down my own cup a little too hard. "She said what?" "She said you were being selfish and that accepting your help would encourage your bad behavior." The audacity was stunning even for Patricia. "Mrs. Chen, you are welcome in my house anytime, regardless of what Patricia says. In fact, you should probably plan to sleep here tonight. I have a guest room that is much safer than your house with no heat." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. I will help you get whatever you need from your house." We bundled up and walked next door to her dark, cold house. It was already feeling like a refrigerator inside. I helped her pack a bag with clothes, medications, and dog supplies. The whole time, I could feel eyes watching from Patricia's house across the street. Back at my place, I got Mrs. Chen settled in the guest room with extra blankets and a space heater, even though the furnace was keeping the whole house warm. She fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the stress and cold. I was cleaning up the cocoa mugs when my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I answered anyway. "Mr. Russo, this is Patricia Hensley calling in my official capacity as HOA president." "Hello, Patricia. I am calling to inform you that the emergency board meeting has been scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m. at my residence. Your presence is mandatory. Nothing in the bylaws makes HOA meetings mandatory for homeowners," I said. "This concerns a serious violation of community standards." "What violation?" "That will be discussed at the meeting. If you do not attend, the board will make decisions in your absence." "Fine, I will be there." She hung up without saying goodbye. I looked at my phone and shook my head. This was going to be interesting. The next morning, I woke to a winter wonderland. Ice coated everything, turning the neighborhood into a crystal sculpture garden. Trees sagged under the weight, and several branches had snapped. Power lines were down on the next street over, which explained why the outage was taking so long to fix. The utility company would have to make repairs before electricity could be restored. My generator was still humming along. I checked the fuel level and topped it off from one of my storage cans. Mrs. Chen was awake and feeding Machai in the kitchen. "Good morning," she said cheerfully. She looked much better after a warm night's sleep. "Morning. How did you sleep?" "Like a baby. Your guest bed is more comfortable than mine." I made breakfast for both of us, scrambled eggs and toast, luxuries when everyone else was eating cold cereal or nothing at all. While we ate, I checked the news on my phone. The ice storm had affected 3 counties, and over 200,000 people were without power. The governor had declared a state of emergency. Warming centers were being set up in towns throughout the region, but transportation was dangerous because of ice on the roads. At 9:45, I bundled up and walked across the street to Patricia's house. Several other board members were arriving at the same time. I recognized Linda Morrison, the treasurer, and Bob Kimball, the secretary. They both looked cold and miserable. Patricia's house was freezing inside. She had a fire going in the fireplace, but it was barely making a dent in the cold. Everyone was wearing coats and gloves. I almost felt bad about being comfortable in just a light jacket. "Thank you all for coming," Patricia said, standing in front of the fireplace like she was holding court. "We are here to address Nathan Russo's violations of community standards during this emergency." "What violations?" I asked. She pulled out a folder, which I had to admire for its dedication to bureaucracy, even in a crisis. "First, your generator is creating noise pollution that violates the quiet enjoyment clause of the covenants." "My generator is operating within legal noise limits," I said. "I have the specs if you want to see them." "Second, you are using excessive electricity during a community emergency, which is wasteful and inconsiderate." "I am using my own electricity generated by my own equipment on my own property. There is no provision against that." "Third, you are harboring another resident against HOA recommendation, which undermines board authority." That one made me stand up. "Are you seriously trying to tell me I cannot let Mrs. Chen stay in my house when hers has no heat? She is 82 years old. She could die from hypothermia." Linda Morrison spoke up, and she sounded uncertain. "Patricia, I am not sure we can actually enforce any of this. Nathan is right that there is no bylaw against using his own generator. The spirit of the community covenants requires cooperation and equal treatment," Patricia said. "The covenants do not mention anything about emergencies or resource sharing," Bob Kimball added. He was a retired lawyer, and I could see him mentally reviewing the bylaws. "I do not think we have standing to impose any kind of violation here." Patricia's face was getting red again. "Fine. Then I propose an emergency bylaw amendment requiring all backup power sources to be registered with the HOA and subject to community use during emergencies." "That would require a full homeowner vote," Bob said. "We cannot just amend the bylaws by board fiat. Then we will hold a vote." "In the middle of an ice storm with no power?" Linda asked. "How exactly do you propose we do that?" The meeting was falling apart, and I could see Patricia getting more frustrated by the minute. She was used to getting her way through sheer force of personality, but the other board members were not backing her up this time. "I want it on record that Nathan Russo is being uncooperative during a community crisis," Patricia said. "And I want it on record that I am following all bylaws and applicable laws while using my personal property on my private residence," I said. "If that is all, I am going back to my warm house." I left before she could respond. The other board members followed shortly after, and I heard Linda telling Patricia that she was going home before she froze. The rest of the day was quiet. Mrs. Chen and I played cards and watched movies on my television, which was running perfectly off the generator. I checked on a few other neighbors, offering to let them charge devices or warm up if needed. Most took me up on it gratefully. Only Patricia and a couple of her close friends stayed away. That evening, there was a loud knock on my door. I opened it to find Patricia standing there with 2 police officers. "That is him," she said, pointing at me dramatically. "He is stealing electricity from the community." The officers looked confused and cold. The older one, whose badge said Officer Martinez, said, "Sir, do you have a generator running?" "I do," I said. "Would you like to come inside where it is warm?" "Yes, actually," the younger officer, Officer Davis, said immediately. I let them in. They looked around at my warm, well-lit house and then at each other. "Madam," Officer Martinez said to Patricia, who had followed them in, "can you explain exactly what crime you think is being committed?" "He has a generator when no one else does, and he is refusing to share it with the community. That is theft of community resources. It is his generator, Officer Davis said slowly. How is that theft? The HOA has a right to all resources during an emergency. Officer Martinez pulled out a notepad, more out of habit than necessity it seemed. Sir, is this your generator? Yes, I own it. I purchased it last summer and had it professionally installed with all proper permits. Here I can show you the paperwork. I pulled out my file folder with the receipt, installation certificate, and building permit. Officer Martinez reviewed them and nodded. Everything appears to be in order. Sir, you are not obligated to share your personal property with anyone unless there is a specific law requiring it, which there is not. This is ridiculous, Patricia said. The HOA has authority over what happens in this community. The HOA has authority over covenant enforcement, madam, Officer Martinez said. It does not supersede property rights or personal ownership. This gentleman is not committing any crime. But it is not fair. Fair is not a legal standard, Officer Davis said. He looked at me. Sir, thank you for your cooperation. Stay warm. The officers left and Patricia stood in my doorway fuming. You are going to regret this, she said. Patricia, go home. You are letting all my heat out. She left, slamming the door behind her. Mrs. Chen, who had been listening from the living room, chuckled. She is not going to let this go, she said. I know. The power came back on 3 days later. It was a Thursday morning and I was having breakfast when the streetlights flickered to life. A cheer went up from various houses as people realized they had electricity again. I shut down my generator and switched everything back to grid power. Mrs. Chen went back to her house after thanking me profusely. I helped her make sure everything was working properly and that her pipes had not frozen. Everything was fine and she hugged me goodbye. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I received a certified letter from the HOA. Inside was a notice of violation and a fine for $2,000. The violation was listed as unauthorized emergency power generation creating unequal living conditions contrary to community standards. I read it 3 times to make sure I was understanding it correctly. They were actually trying to fine me for having a generator. I called Bob Kimball, the board secretary. Bob, did you sign off on this violation notice? He sighed. Nathan, I am sorry. Patricia pushed it through. Linda and I voted against it, but she has 3 friends on the board who do whatever she says. This is not a legitimate violation. There is no bylaw against owning a generator. I know. I told her that. She claims it falls under the General Welfare Clause. That is not how that clause works, and you know it. I do know it. Look, my advice as a friend and former lawyer is to refuse to pay it and force them to take you to arbitration. This will not hold up. I am not paying $2,000 for not violating anything. I would not either. Just be prepared for Patricia to make your life difficult. He was right about that too. Over the next month, I received 5 additional violation notices, one for my grass being a 1/4 inch too tall, which it was not. One for parking my car on the street overnight during a snowstorm when my driveway was iced over, even though that was explicitly allowed in the bylaws. One for having a trash can visible from the street on a non-collection day, even though it was in my garage and only visible if you walked up my driveway. One for unauthorized yard decorations, referring to the solar lights along my walkway that had been there for 2 years. And one for disturbing the peace with my generator noise, even though I had not run my generator since the ice storm ended. Each violation came with a fine ranging from $500 to $1,000. The total was approaching $8,000 in bogus fines. I documented everything, took pictures, kept copies of all correspondence, and started building a case. I also reached out to a real estate attorney named Jennifer Walsh who specialized in HOA disputes. Jennifer reviewed my documents and smiled grimly. This is harassment, clear cut. The HOA is retaliating against you for not complying with an illegal demand. Can we sue? We can do better than that. We can request binding arbitration, which the bylaws require before any lawsuit. In arbitration, we will get these fines thrown out and we can counter for harassment and attorney fees. If they do not accept the arbitration results, then we sue, and at that point we can add punitive damages. Let us do it. Jennifer filed the arbitration request. The HOA had 30 days to respond. During that time, I received 3 more violation notices. Jennifer added each one to our case file. The arbitration was scheduled for late March at a neutral office in Riverside. The arbitrator was a retired judge named Harold Chen, who had a reputation for being fair but strict about following rules. I arrived with Jennifer and all my documentation. Patricia arrived with Mark and a lawyer named Douglas Fletcher who looked expensive and bored. Judge Chen reviewed both sides' submissions and then looked at Patricia. Mrs. Hensley, I have read your complaint. You are seeking to collect approximately $12,000 in fines from Mr. Russo for various violations. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. And Mr. Russo contests all of these violations. Let us go through them one by one. For the next 2 hours, we went through each violation. Jennifer systematically destroyed every single one. The grass violation was disproved with time-stamped photos showing my lawn was properly maintained. The parking violation was shown to be explicitly allowed under the bylaws. The trash can violation required Jennifer to point out that the covenant-specified trash cans visible from the street, not from someone's driveway. The yard decoration violation fell apart when she showed that solar walkway lights were specifically listed as approved decorations in the architectural guidelines. The generator noise violation was impossible since I had not run the generator since the ice storm. Then we got to the original violation, the $2,000 fine for having power during the emergency. Judge Chen read the violation notice carefully. Mrs. Hensley, which bylaw does this violation fall under? The General Welfare Clause, Your Honor. Section 15 states that all homeowners must contribute to the general welfare of the community. And how does owning a generator violate that? It created inequality during the emergency. Other residents did not have power because they did not have generators, Judge Chen said. Mr. Russo had a generator because he purchased one, correct? Yes, and you wanted him to share this generator with the community. It was an emergency. Community resources should be shared. But it was not a community resource. It was his personal property. Jennifer spoke up. Your Honor, if I may. The HOA president called the police during the ice storm and falsely reported that my client was stealing electricity. The police found no wrongdoing. She then retaliated by issuing this fine and numerous subsequent fines, all of which we have shown to be baseless. This is clear harassment. Judge Chen nodded slowly. He looked at Patricia. Mrs. Hensley, did you call the police? I was trying to enforce community standards. That is not what I asked. Did you call the police and report a crime? I reported what I believed was inappropriate behavior. The police found no crime had been committed, correct? Patricia's lawyer whispered something to her. She nodded reluctantly. Correct. Judge Chen closed the file folder in front of him. I am going to make this very simple. All fines against Mr. Russo are hereby voided. They are without merit and appear to be retaliatory. Mrs. Hensley, you abused your position as HOA president to harass a homeowner who was acting within his legal rights. Mr. Russo, do you have a counter-claim? Jennifer stood. Yes, Your Honor. We are seeking attorney fees in the amount of $4,500, compensation for emotional distress in the amount of $10,000, and an order requiring the HOA to implement training for board members on proper bylaw enforcement. Granted on all counts. The HOA will pay Mr. Russo's attorney fees and $10,000 in damages within 60 days. Additionally, the board must complete HOA governance training from a certified provider within 90 days and provide proof of completion. Finally, I am recommending that the homeowners consider whether Mrs. Hensley should continue as board president, though that is not within my authority to mandate. Patricia looked like she had been slapped. Her lawyer was already packing up his briefcase, clearly wanting to get out of there as fast as possible. "This is not over," Patricia said as we were leaving. "Actually, it is," Jennifer said. "If you continue to harass my client, we will file a civil lawsuit for stalking and harassment, and I promise you will lose. You have already lost today. Take the loss and move on." The check from the HOA arrived 58 days later. Jennifer took her fees and I deposited the rest. More satisfying than the money was the announcement that went out to all homeowners 2 weeks after that. Patricia had been voted out as HOA president in a special election. 73% of homeowners had voted, which was nearly unprecedented, and 82% of those had voted to remove her. Bob Kimball was elected as the new president, and one of his first acts was to revise the violation process to include an appeal procedure and a requirement that all violations cite specific bylaw provisions. Patricia and Mark moved out of Meadowbrook Heights 3 months later. I heard through the neighborhood gossip that they bought a house in a different community about 20 miles away. I felt a little bad for Mark, but mostly I was just relieved. The following winter, another storm rolled through, though not as severe as the ice storm. My generator fired up automatically when the power went out, and within minutes, Mrs. Chen was at my door with matcha. "I thought I would come over before you had to invite me," she said with a smile. "You are always welcome," I said. We sat in my warm living room, drinking hot cocoa and watching the rain fall outside. This time, though, I noticed several other houses had lights on too. The ice storm had taught people a lesson about preparation. At least half a dozen homes on my street had installed their own generators. Bob Kimball called me later that evening. "Hey Nathan, the new community center project is almost done. We are having a ribbon-cutting ceremony next month. I was hoping you would say a few words." "What kind of words?" "Just talk about community preparedness and looking out for each other. You know, the stuff you actually did during the ice storm while Patricia was busy being Patricia." I laughed. "Sure, I can do that." The community center renovation had been Bob's main project as president. The old center had been outdated and barely used. The new one had a commercial generator, supplies for emergencies, and was designed as a warming and cooling center for future weather events. It also had a community garden, a playground, and a meeting room that did not feel like a funeral home. The ribbon cutting was well attended. I gave a short speech about being prepared and helping neighbors, and everyone applauded politely. Mrs. Chen stood in the front row, beaming like a proud grandmother. Afterwards, people came up to thank me, not just for the speech, but for taking a stand against Patricia's overreach. I heard stories from at least a dozen homeowners about ridiculous fines and violations she had issued over the years. One guy had been fined because his dog barked at a squirrel. Another had been cited for having the wrong shade of white paint on his mailbox post. The ice storm and my fight with the HOA had apparently given people courage to speak up about years of petty tyranny. "You know what the funny thing is?" Bob said as we were cleaning up after the ceremony. Patricia actually did us a favor by being so unreasonable. It forced us to look at how the HOA was being run and make real changes. The new bylaws are clearer, the board is more accountable, and people are actually engaged with community governance now. I guess every villain serves a purpose, I said. She was not a villain. She was just a bully with a little bit of power. But yeah, sometimes it takes someone pushing too far to make everyone else realize they need to push back. I went home that evening feeling good about how things had turned out. My generator sat quietly in the backyard, shrubs grown up around it, ready for the next emergency. I had learned an important lesson during the ice storm. Being prepared is not selfish. Standing up for yourself is not wrong. And sometimes the best thing you can do for a community is refuse to enable bad behavior from its leaders. A few weeks later, I was working in my front yard when a moving truck pulled up to the house where Patricia and Mark used to live. A young couple got out, looking excited and a little overwhelmed. I walked over to introduce myself. "Hi, I am Nathan. I live across the street." "I am David, and this is my wife Sarah," the man said. "We are excited to be here. Everyone says this is a great neighborhood." "It is now," I said. "Do you need any help unloading?" We spent the afternoon moving boxes and furniture. Other neighbors came by to help too. Mrs. Chen brought cookies. Bob stopped by to welcome them officially and give them information about the HOA, emphasizing that they should reach out if they ever had questions or concerns. The previous owner said something about HOA problems, Sarah asked cautiously. "That was solved," I said. "The old board president had some issues with power. She does not live here anymore." "Good," David said. "We had HOA nightmares at our last place. We almost did not buy in another HOA community because of it." "This one is different now," Bob assured him. "We learned some hard lessons about governance and accountability. You will be fine here." That night, I made myself a cup of hot cocoa and sat on my back porch, listening to the generator's quiet hum during a test run. The night was clear and cool, stars visible despite the light pollution from the city. Everything felt settled and right. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Walsh, my attorney. "Hey, thought you should know. Patricia Hensley is being sued by her new HOA for harassment and improper fine assessments. Apparently she joined the board and immediately started issuing violations. Some people never learn," I texted back. "Not our problem anymore. Nope, stay out of trouble. Always do." I finished my cocoa and went inside, locking the door behind me. The house was warm and comfortable, exactly as it should be. I had stood up to a bully, defended my rights, and helped make my community better in the process. The memory of Patricia demanding my generator while I sat warm and comfortable with my hot cocoa would always make me smile, not because I enjoyed her discomfort, but because it represented a moment when I chose not to be pushed around. Sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all. Sometimes it is just living well, being prepared, and refusing to surrender your principles because someone else thinks their demands are more important than your rights. Patricia learned that lesson the hard way. I hoped she would figure it out eventually, but that was not my concern anymore. I had my generator, my warm house, my good neighbors, and my peace of mind. That was more than enough. The ice storm had come and gone, but the lessons remained. Be prepared, stand firm, help those who need it. And never let someone with a little bit of authority convince you that their abuse of power is somehow your responsibility to enable. The generator sat in my backyard, ready for whatever came next. And when the next emergency came, as it inevitably would, I would be ready. My neighbors would be ready too. We had all learned something valuable that frozen February when Patricia Hensley demanded something she had no right to demand. and I said no while sipping hot cocoa in my warm house. That was the lesson worth remembering. Sometimes the most important word in the English language is no, and the most important thing you can do is have the courage to say it when it matters. Patricia never understood that. She thought authority meant the right to make demands. Real authority, the kind that matters, comes from earning respect through fair treatment and leading by example. Bob understood that. Mrs. Chen understood it. Even Mark understood it, which was probably why he looked so relieved when they moved away. And now our community understood it too. We had a HOA that served homeowners instead of ruling over them. We had rules that made sense and were fairly enforced. We had a community center that actually helped the community instead of just existing as a monument to bureaucracy. All because one February the ice came down, the power went out, and someone demanded what was not theirs to take. And because when that happened, I said no and meant it, even when it would have been easier to give in. The hot cocoa had never tasted sweeter than it did that week, warm and comforting while the ice coated everything outside. Not because others were cold and I was not, but because it represented a choice to prepare, to stand firm, and to protect what was mine while still helping those who truly needed it. Mrs. Chen got warmth and safety. My other neighbors got help when they asked. Patricia got a lesson in boundaries that she desperately needed, even if she never appreciated it. And I got something valuable too, the knowledge that doing the right thing and standing up for yourself can sometimes be the same thing. You do not have to be cruel to be firm. You do not have to surrender to be kind. You can say no to unreasonable demands and still be a good neighbor and a good person. The ice melted. Spring came. Life went on. But I never forgot that week, and neither did anyone else in Meadowbrook Heights. It became part of the neighborhood story, the time when everything changed because one person refused to be bullied, and a community decided they had had enough of tyranny disguised as governance. Now, when I run my generator during testing or emergencies, nobody complains about the noise. When I see Mrs. Chen walking Machai, we wave and smile, sharing the memory of that week we spent playing cards in my warm house while the ice storm raged outside. When Bob sends out HOA newsletters, they are reasonable and helpful instead of threatening and petty. When new neighbors move in, they hear the stories and understand that this is a place where people look out for each other but respect boundaries, where rules serve the community instead of the other way around. And somewhere, in another neighborhood, Patricia is probably measuring someone's grass with a ruler and wondering why people do not respect her authority. Some lessons take a lifetime to learn. Some people never learn them at all. That is not my problem anymore. I did my part by standing firm when it mattered. The rest is up to her. I refilled my cocoa supply last week. Winter will come again eventually, and with it the possibility of more storms, more power outages, more emergencies. My generator is maintained and ready. My fuel supply is fresh. My backup plans have backup plans. And if the power goes out tomorrow, I will be sitting in my warm house with a cup of hot cocoa, comfortable and prepared, knowing that I have learned the most important lesson a homeowner can learn. Your home is your castle, and no HOA president gets to storm the gates just because they want what you have. Patricia demanded my generator during the power outage. I watched her freeze while drinking hot cocoa, and in the end, we both got exactly what we deserved. She got removed from power and sued in her new neighborhood. I got peace, good neighbors, and the satisfaction of knowing I did the right thing even when it was not easy. That is the story. That is what happened. And I would make the same choices again without hesitation, because some principles are worth defending, even if the cost is conflict. especially if the cost is conflict. Because when you surrender your rights to avoid confrontation, you do not buy peace. You just teach bullies that threatening you is an effective strategy. I never gave Patricia my generator. I never gave her the satisfaction of seeing me cave to unreasonable demands. I never gave her the power she thought she had over me. And in refusing to give those things, I gave myself something far more valuable: self-respect, peace of mind, and a community that learned from the experience and became better for it. The hot cocoa cooled eventually, that February during the ice storm. But the warmth of standing up for myself has never faded. Every time I see my generator, every time I help a neighbor, every time I read a reasonable HOA newsletter from Bob, I remember that week and smile. Not with malice, but with satisfaction. The good kind of satisfaction that comes from knowing you did right by yourself and others, even when someone tried very hard to make you feel bad about it. That is how it ends. Not with Patricia apologizing, because she never did. Not with a dramatic showdown, because the arbitration was about as dramatic as paperwork gets. Not with a moral pronounced from on high, because life does not work that way. It ends with simple satisfaction, warm houses, good neighbors, fair rules, and the quiet knowledge that sometimes hot cocoa tastes better when you have earned it by standing firm when it mattered most.